Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Over the last few months, high-profile air travel accidents and incidents across North America have captured public attention. They've also captured the attention of Bloomberg's global aviation editor, Benedikt Kammel.
The big one was Reagan Airport in D.C. That was the mid-air collision between a helicopter and the regional aircraft.
Breaking news out of Washington, D.C., where a commercial airliner has collided with a helicopter in midair while on approach to Reagan National Airport.
Stands out for a number of reasons. You know, it was in the capital, a couple of miles away from the White House, a very congested airspace. Tragically, a lot of lives lost. More than 60 people died in that.
A few weeks after that, a Delta flight that departed from the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport crashed in Toronto.
Again, a regional aircraft that crash-landed, skidded along the runway, and then practically cartwheeled, losing one wing and landing, bizarrely, on its roof.
Its landing gear appearing to collapse, the right wing striking the ground, sparking flames, the plane flipping onto its back. A cloud of black smoke rising into the air.
Miraculously, nobody died in that incident. People managed to clamber out of the aircraft, out of the destroyed hull, essentially, and walk to safety. So, two really scary and tragic, but also very remarkable incidents.
And they've come at the end of one of the safest periods for air travel in U.S. history. But it's not just those two crashes. There's been a string of other incidents. The cabin of a Delta flight filling with haze, a near miss between an airliner and a private jet on a runway in Chicago, an Asiana flight coming in too low in San Francisco. It all raises a question: what is going on with American air travel?
One thing that has become almost a common feature of these accidents is that they are almost always these days, there's footage of them. Whereas previously you might have read and heard about them days later, they're instantly in the social media loop these days. Everyone looks at them, everyone is really transfixed by what's going on, and that probably has contributed to a sense of unease.
I'm David Gura, and this is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. Today on the show, what's behind the recent flurry of airline incidents, and is there cause for concern? This recent spate of tragic and terrifying air safety incidents has made many travelers worried. I asked Bloomberg's Benedikt Kammel to put them in context. It does seem like these last few weeks stand out, that there have been more air safety incidents than usual. Am I right in my read of that?
It does feel that way. That's certainly how people would see it. And judging by the questions I'm being asked by friends, by colleagues, is it still safe to fly? That certainly is a sense that's crept into the public perception.
Friends have been asking you about this. I've heard from friends who are more apprehensive, more nervous about flying. Did the data bear out those kind of anecdotal pieces of evidence? Do we kind of sense a broader trend in public opinion that people are more fearful of flying in light of what's been happening?
Yes, that's certainly the case. And it's something that really we started seeing probably in a more pronounced way since the beginning of last year. If you remember, there was that eerie accident on the Boeing 737 from Alaska Airlines where that door plug blew out.
Investigators are increasingly focused on the four powerful bolts that should have kept the door panel from flying off this 737 MAX 9.
That was really such a publicized and public event that a lot of people started asking, what is going on? Can you imagine me sitting on that plane and suddenly sort of the door bursting out in mid-flight? That, I think, really hit home for a lot of people. And in the weeks after that, we had a couple of incidents, none of them fatal, none of them dramatic, but every time something happens, every time there was a near incursion on a runway, every time there was what we call a go-around, i.e. a plane trying to land but then taking off again because something's wrong, a wheel falling off, something with the engine, things that previously people really wouldn't have cared that much about, that became far more pronounced.
United Airlines faces more questions this morning after a wheel fell off a Boeing 757.
But Monday's incident marks the second time a wheel has fallen off a United plane during takeoff in the last 4 months.
Seems like we're having more and more of these incidents. You don't want to hear brace.
So you almost enter a bit of a, so should we say, sort of echo chamber whereby every additional incident gets added to the list and people get more and more worried. If you look at the data versus sort of the public sentiment out there, the two don't really move in tandem.
When it comes to aviation incidents, I imagine there's a spectrum, and at one end, you have the kind of mid-air collision that we saw in Washington. On the other end, I guess perhaps some issues with taxiing, something like that.
So the most common is what we call a tail strike. Yeah, so that's basically the tail of the aircraft striking the runway. We have runway excursions, which means the plane basically rolling over the runway into a grass field or something like that. They're usually not tragic. I mean, they happen, they damage a plane. More often than not, planes might touch each other on the tarmac. They try and come out of their parking position and they smack into another aircraft, or that, a truck, a catering truck or whatever might smash into an aircraft. These things happen more often than you think, but they don't get publicized that much. Yeah, people don't really read about them because it's sort of par for the course. It's something that just happens, and people move on. It's only when it's dramatic, when it's tragic, when there are fatalities involved, that's really when people take note. There were about 9 serious runway incursions, so sort of 2 aircraft coming close to one another in 2024. There were 24 in 2023. So that gives you a sense, this is data for the US, that gives you a sense of just how rare this is. So 9 over the course of a year is really not very many if you, again, think about the number of movements that we have.
I was struck reading about that mid-air collision between the American Airlines Flight and the military helicopter in Washington, that we hadn't had a fatal air crash in the U.S. since 2009. What accounts for that rather long period, 15 plus years of safety?
Well, it's a number of things. Pilot training has become very good. The aircraft generally have become extremely reliable kit. Whenever we do have accidents these days, most of the time, this is not because of faulty equipment. Most of the time, there's some kind of pilot or navigation error involved. So that has definitely improved. The other thing is to point out the obvious, we live in a fairly safe part of the world. We don't live in a conflict zone. And also, when something does go wrong, there's an extremely diligent process in place to make sure, that everyone understands what caused this, what can be learned from it, and how to prevent this from happening again.
Coming up, how air travel safety in the U.S. compares to the rest of the world, the challenges ahead for American aviation, and what this means for flyers right now. I asked Bloomberg's Benedikt Kammel how the U.S. airspace system compares to other parts of the world.
I mean, it is incredibly congested, but it's controlled. But there are obviously parts of the system that at times look to be overwhelmed. And it's in some ways also slightly messy. As we saw with the helicopter and aircraft collision, you sort of had 2 different species of aircraft in the same airspace. And in areas like DC or in other parts of the world where you have these sort of different forms of air transport colliding, as it were, or sort of moving in tandem, that can be difficult to navigate. And they did actually make some changes after that collision to say, okay, we want helicopters to be out of certain zones, we want to suspend helicopter movements and so on. So that they instantly look at these things and think about, okay, what can we do differently? Private jets, another, should we say, species of aircraft that have really grown in the number of usage over the last couple of years, really since COVID. And suffice it to say, private jets and commercial jets, they might not always move sort of in the same kind of way. The person navigating the private jet might have a different sort of training background. So there are these specificities in the industry, and that's not even talking about drones and maybe the future of electric flying. So the complexity of the airspace has become such that navigating through these different types of aircraft in the sky is already complicated and will probably become more complicated still.
We've heard in recent weeks about the technology underpinning air safety, air traffic control here in the U.S., and a lot about the insufficient amount of air traffic controllers in the U.S. How unique are those problems when you look at air travel around the world?
It is fair to say that in most countries, air traffic control systems have sort of evolved and grown over the years and might not always be state of the art. They might look a little creaky in some ways. The computer systems might not be up to scratch. They are slow moving. They don't update that quickly. But by and large, they work. It's a system that's also built on redundancy, that is built on let's make sure it works. It might not be state of the art, but it's safe. If it's not broken, don't fix it. That's sort of the attitude. So there are obviously attempts to upgrade these. There's a lot of money involved. There are new players coming in. We've heard from Elon Musk. Donald Trump himself said we have an old broken system. We have the new Transport Secretary, Sean Duffy, saying we need to rethink the national airspace. And he said that he's going to plug Doge, Elon Musk's group, into the system. So there are attempts out there, some of them probably more audacious than others, to upgrade the system. But what you see is, this isn't just a quick software update. You want to make sure it works, and it works reliably. You have to be absolutely sure. You need the redundancy in the system, and having something that might be maybe not quite state of the art, but reliable sometimes is better than saying, okay, let's try out something new and let's hope for the best. So there is an attempt to upgrade the system, but how much time are you willing to sacrifice for that? Who's in charge of this? Those are some of the questions that are being asked right now.
When it comes to personnel, to those air traffic controllers, I understand many of them are working 10-hour days, 6-day weeks. How sustainable is that, and why has it been so difficult to hire a sufficient amount of air traffic controllers in the U.S.?
This has been an issue for many years, but it became more pronounced during the pandemic when a lot of people left the industry and left the FAA, the body that oversees aviation in the US, the regulator. And we have had a drain of air traffic controllers. They've retired very often and not been replaced in sufficient numbers. There was an attempt under the Biden administration to really go out to universities, go out to colleges, try and recruit more people, but we're still far short of where they should be. It's not seen as a particularly attractive line of work. I don't know what the pay is, but I imagine it's not astronomical. So there are people out there who think, well, why should I go into this field? And really attracting the talent has been difficult. Now, after the crash in DC, there was a lot of debate over, have we hired the right people? Have maybe diversity efforts gone too far and attracted the wrong types of people? That was a line that was put forward by Donald Trump and Sean Duffy to some degree. Others will say this is absolutely not the cause of any crash. The people that do operate in these towers are highly professional. There is no shortage. When there are fewer people on staff, it's because, it's a slow day of traffic. It's not because we lack the people. But the truth is, there aren't still enough people out there. They could do with more. But what we're seeing right now is, the government going in and actually weeding out positions and removing people, not mission critical and safety critical people, they say, but over, this department and others, there are people losing their jobs. And obviously that's not great for morale. If you are thinking about going into that industry, you might think twice going forward.
Benedikt, I wanted to get your perspective on this because you and I are talking just a few days after reports that Federal Aviation Administration workers were let go. And as you say, the government has been adamant that they aren't safety critical, but we've seen unions push back on that. How should we look at what's happened here in the context of recent events, in the context of kind of the long-standing difficulties that the U.S. has faced hiring adequate staff to deal with aviation safety?
Well, this certainly doesn't help. If you want to attract people, you need to provide certain sort of measures that will seem attractive to them. It has to be pay, it has to be working hours, but it also has to be job security. And these were people who were let go within their first year of their probation. So for future generations or people thinking about a job in somewhere like air traffic control or somewhere else within the FAA, be it an engineer, be it in certification, there are other fields within the FAA, they might think twice going forward because they might think, well, if I'm just going to be targeted within my first year because somebody, be it Elon Musk or somebody else thinks that I'm not performing properly, then I might as well go to Amazon or I'll go to Boeing or I'll go to, somewhere else where I feel there's a greater sense of job security. And after years of trying to really increase the hiring, this is probably seen as fairly counterproductive.
You said you've been fielding questions from friends, or maybe they've been coming to you a bit nervous about flying. What do you say to them, maybe to try to ease their nerves a bit?
I say flying is safe. There's very little you can do about it one way or the other, short of not getting on a plane. But think of the 3 million travelers in the US alone who get on a plane every day, take off and land safely. Think of the 45,000 planes that do this. Think of the 40 million aircraft that fly across the world every year, and only very, very few do not get to their destination. The chances of perishing or even getting hurt on a plane are absolutely minuscule. Now, obviously, every person that dies or gets injured on a plane is one too many. But overall, I know I'm sounding like an industry lobbyist at this point, but overall, it's still a very, very safe mode of transport.
This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm David Gura. This episode is produced by David Fox. It was edited by Ryan Bean and Naomi Shaven, who's also our senior producer. It was fact-checked by Adriana Tapia and mixed and sound designed by Alex Segura. Our senior editor is Elizabeth Ponso. Our executive producer is Nicole Beamsterboer. Sage Bauman is Bloomberg's head of podcasts. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe and review The Big Take wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back on Monday.